The Washday Marathon, read by Erika Jones, from the book Next Door to Nanny, written by Frances Kozlowski.
Wash day was just that, a day devoted to laundry. The entire process included sorting, washing, drying, hanging clothes out on a clothesline, folding, dampening certain items, then ironing them. By the time all of this was completed, an entire day had gone by. Except for preparing meals, not much else took place. There were no shortcuts, and each step took its own good time. I don't know which day of the week Nanny preferred for this all-day wash-a-thon. She may have chosen Monday, or the day may not have mattered at all. But it certainly was not Sunday, because Nanny was too busy cooking her usual Sunday feasts on that day. Plus, Scripture indicated that it was not respectful to work on God's day, so she didn't. During the summer, though, I noticed that many times Nanny and her friend next door, Edna Evans, chose to do their laundry on the same day. I was Nanny's laundry assistant, while Joy, Edna's daughter, was her mom's helper. Nanny started out early in the morning, right after the breakfast dishes were washed and put away. Washing clothes was definitely not something to tackle sometime in the afternoon. Goodness, no. You'd be up past midnight trying to finish it all. No one would attempt such a thing. Nanny did her laundry in the basement. There was a wringer washer down there with 2 tubs. Other things resided there as well. There were rows of canned fruits and vegetables sitting on shelves, evidence of my grandmother's earlier efforts at food preservation. Peaches, tomatoes, pickles, and sauerkraut sat patiently waiting for someone to discover them again and take them back upstairs. Alas, many had been residents there for years. There were also spiders and camel crickets who had made their homes in the cool, dark basement for countless generations, I'm sure. I was not too keen on these critters, but Nanny just ignored them. She concentrated one-pointedly on the task at hand, which was laundry. Forget the crickets. In the back of the basement stood the big coal furnace with a load of coal dumped nearby. A truck came by once or twice a year and replenished the stack. Beside the furnace was a shovel and a coal bucket with a tapered front end. In the winter, coal had to be added to the furnace every morning, or the house would soon become quite cold. Up above were the clotheslines, strung about halfway up to the ceiling. Not too high, otherwise Nanny couldn't reach them, for she was not very tall, 5 feet or maybe 5 feet 2 inches at the most. The basement clotheslines were only used for about 3 months during the winter. You couldn't hang clothes outside then because they would become cold, stiff, and frozen. For the remaining 9 months, Nanny used the clotheslines behind the garage, since the Maryville area always has plenty of warm to hot days during spring, summer, and fall. Nanny did not have an automatic washer or dryer in the mid-1950s. You couldn't go to an appliance store and buy one because they weren't there yet. Years later, though, Nanny replaced her wringer washer with an automatic one. And she no longer had to hang clothes out to dry on a clothesline because she had a dryer. But during the time when I lived next door to her, she still used her old reliable wringer washing machine. Granddaddy probably bought it for her sometime in the 1940s. It might have been a Maytag. As I recall, it was a big white round wash tub with a removable agitator. There was a lid that fit on top and a hose that connected to a water faucet in a nearby tub. Above the white tub with the agitator were 2 rollers where the clothes could be fed through manually to wring out the soap and water. Before wringer washers were invented, People had to use their hands to wring out all the soap and water, one garment at a time. This, no doubt, was a time-consuming task that was hard on the hands and wrists. So the wringer-type machine was better than doing all your laundry by hand. But later, washing machines were better still, because they spun-dried the clothes to remove the water and soap. No one had to feed each article of clothing through rollers. Colored clothes were washed together in the tub. White clothes were always washed separately. Nanny added bluing to the white clothes so that they wouldn't turn yellowish after many washings. I was never allowed to use the wringer, for Nanny was concerned that I might get my fingers or hands caught between the rollers. There were reports of people doing just that, and the bones and muscles in their hands were seriously damaged. However, she did let me feel the top of the washing machine agitator with the palm of my hand as it moved back and forth in a splashy, repetitive rhythm. The machine also emitted a mechanical tone as it washed the clothes, and I liked to match the tone with my voice. That way I felt the machine, listened to the machine, and hummed along with it, all at the same time. That old Maytag washer was a helpful tool for my grandmother, but for me as a child, it was more like a loud, fun, splashing water toy. I loved wash day. After the clothes were all washed, rinsed, and wrung out, Nanny and I would load them into laundry baskets and carry them outside to the clothesline behind the garage. By this time, it was approaching noon. We had been in the basement for over 2 hours, maybe longer. As we passed the rear of the garage, I would check to see if the black widow spider was still there. She had made an impressive web near the climbing roses. Nanny had told me all about black widows and how to recognize their bright red hourglass marking. I knew never to bother them or get too close. The spider stayed there all summer. Looking to my right, I saw Joy and her mother arriving to hang out their clothes too. Nanny noticed Edna and called out a friendly greeting. I didn't rush over to ask Joy if she would like to play for a while. I sensed that this was not the time. Joy knew this too. I was supposed to help Nanny hang out the clothes, and Joy was supposed to help her mother do the same. Then it occurred to me what was going on. This was a kind of undeclared race, a competition of sorts with 2 teams, Nanny's team versus Edna's team. No wonder Nanny and Mrs. Evans washed clothes on the same day. Maybe they both chose Monday because it was the customary wash day, but maybe it was because they liked to have this friendly competition to see who would be the first to get their washing out on the line. This was great. The race was on. With our tools at hand, wooden clothespins and a big cloth bag, we worked quickly but carefully. Before we started pinning the laundry to the lines, we had to wipe them off with a damp cloth. Otherwise, the freshly washed clothes might get dust or dirt on them. Only after this was done could we begin pinning. And you couldn't hang up clothes just any old way. Nanny made sure I hung them up correctly so they would get maximum sun exposure. This sort of information, rules of the road, was passed on to daughters by mothers and grandmothers and was part of learning how to navigate through a maze of domestic duties. All of this would come in very handy later. Nanny and I hung up sheets and pillowcases. Joy and Edna hung up sheets and pillowcases. Nanny and I hung up shirts and work pants. Joy and Edna hung up shirts and work pants. Nanny and I hung up dish towels, bath towels, and washcloths. Joy and Edna hung up their kitchen towels, bath towels, and washcloths. On we went, working quickly and expertly until every last item was on the line. Then the 4 of us would glance over to the yard next door to see who finished first. This was a quiet, unspoken victory, and we all knew which team had won for that day. Afterward, we would meet together under the willow tree, take a break and chat for a while. Nanny would go into the house and bring out iced tea or lemonade, and we would laugh and talk and congratulate each other on a job well done. The competition was over, and the four of us celebrated happily, sitting in the shade. But more work awaited us. Joy and her mother headed back home, and Nanny and I went back indoors. After a couple of hours, the clothes were dry, so we took them off the line, brought them into the house, and dumped them all on the sofa. We folded the towels and washcloths and put them away. Everything else had to be ironed because most clothes were made of cotton. This included all of the sheets, pillowcases, and tablecloths too. Nanny ironed her clothes in the dining room. It was big and roomy. Actually, the dining room should have been called the ironing room because it was hardly ever used for meals. Everyone ate in the kitchen except for Thanksgiving, Christmas, or Easter feasts. You couldn't just take clothes off the clothesline, bring them into the house, and start ironing, though. First, you had to dampen each article of clothing. This was done by using a spray bottle filled with water. After each item of clothing was sprayed, it was rolled up and put into a large plastic bag. Then, in about 30 minutes, they were damp enough to iron. Ironing clothes could take 2 or 3 hours, depending on the number of clothes in the dampening bag. Shirts had to be ironed in a certain way, so did pants, so did everything. For example, Nanny taught me to iron shirts, starting with the collars first, then the front button closure areas, then the upper back of the shirt, then the large front pieces, then finally the large back bottom piece. There was always a method. What was easiest, saved time, or reduced wrinkles. There wasn't much to ironing sheets, though. You just had to be careful not to let the clean sheet drag on the floor. If you couldn't finish ironing all of the clothes in the dampening bag in one afternoon, you could let them sit in the bag for a few more hours and finish them in the evening. However, if they were left in the bag for much longer, they would start to mildew. That spelled trouble, meaning that those clothes would have to be washed and dried all over again to get rid of the smell. So, even if you were tired, you kept on ironing until everything was finished. Then all the clothes were hung in the closets or folded neatly and placed in dresser drawers, and you were through with the laundry until the next week, when the whole process started all over again. It is easy to see why people were more than glad to purchase the wrinkle-resistant fabrics that came on the market in the 1960s. Spending an entire day each week washing and ironing clothes was a large chunk of time. Today, American women, and men too, would never dream of devoting 1 day out of 7 to washing and ironing clothes. With automatic washers and dryers and wrinkle-free fabrics, laundry time is greatly reduced, perhaps to just an hour or 2. However, women in the 1950s had no choice. It was something you didn't question, you just did it, and it took all day. But at least Nanny and Edna made a game out of it for part of the time. I know, because I was one of the contestants in their summertime weekly wash-a-thons.